Okay, so tonight is the second in our three-part series on the holidays. And tonight we're doing Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. We'll go in order. And the topic within Yom Kippur is the mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur. And this is not some ancient diet. You know, there's all kinds of diets nowadays with cleansing fasts and the like. So this is not an ancient form of a diet. Instead, this is an important part of the spiritual work of the day of Yom Kippur, the work of fasting. It's an important practice. So tonight we're going to discuss some sources for the practice, how we know this is a mitzvah of the day, as well as why. Why do we fast on Yom Kippur? So when we answer the question why, we'll answer it from a few different perspectives. We'll answer it from let's call it a philosophical perspective, a halachic perspective, and then ultimately we'll finish off with a Hasidic perspective. And then this Hasidic perspective hopefully will give us insight into how to prepare for Yom Kippur and how to make the most of the spiritual energy which is revealed on this holiest of days. Now, Yom Kippur is by no means the only day that we fast in Judaism. There's actually one other day where we fast the full 25 hours, like Yom Kippur. That's the 9th of Av, when we commemorate the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. We have other fast days throughout the year. We have the fast of Tainus Esther, connected to the holiday of Purim. We have other holidays where we fast related to the destruction of the temple. We have the Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and the 17th day of Tammuz. We have the day after Rosh Hashanah where we fast for Tzom Gedalia, also connected to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So we fast throughout Judaism on the calendar. You know, Yom Kippur is not the only fast. There's even an idea in Judaism of personal fasts. Oh, she's not seeing the screen. Is it up? Let's see. So that'll do it. Now do you see it? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so there's also an idea of personal fasts. So if you have what's called a Tainus Cholon, so for bad dreams, if somebody has something terrible that happens in a dream, there is a practice to fast the following day. There is the fast on the day that a person gets married. It's considered like a personal Yom Kippur, the day of a wedding. So there's a custom to fast the day of a wedding. There are personal fasts for your own, let's call it, spiritual growth. There's people who will fast as a way of concentrating their spiritual energies, in certain periods of time. There's what's called Tainus Tzadikim. There are holy days like throughout the year where the energy is accessed best by fasting, and the tzaddikim, the righteous people, will fast on these days. So there's fasts many times in many different ways for different reasons all throughout Judaism.
Pidyon Haben?
Pidyon Haben, we don't fast on Pidyon Haben. Pidyon Haben is...
That's for the firstborn being thrown in the river, isn't it?
No, Pidyon Haben is for the redeeming of the firstborn.
I thought the Bechors were supposed to fast.
So there's Tainus Bechorim, which is before Pesach. Erev Pesach, there's a custom to fast. Yeah. Tainus Bechorim is the day before Pesach we do that. That usually gets pushed off, customarily, by a Sudas mitzvah. It's customary to complete a tractate of Talmud and then celebrate with a festive meal and invite all the firstborns to partake in the festive meal, which pushes off the fast. But yeah, it's another fast before Pesach. But Yom Kippur is unique of all of these fasts in that it's the only fast day which is explicitly mandated in the Torah. It's the only one where we see there's a command in the Torah to fast. Now, where do we find this? We find this idea of fasting in the Torah, we find in the parsha of Achrei Mos. Now, Achrei Mos identifies the actual date of Yom Kippur. So in Judaism, we kind of have our calendars. We have two starts, right? There's the month start, and then there's the year start. So when I say the month start, the first month of the year is the month of Nisan, when we have Pesach. So that's the first month. But the year start is in Tishrei. So it's an interesting idea over here. But when it says the seventh month of the year in the Torah, that's talking about Tishrei, when we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, these type of things. So in Parshas Achrei Mos, we get the date of Yom Kippur, when the Yom Tov falls out, and we also get the commandment from the Torah of all the different rituals, all the different mitzvahs to be performed on that day. Now, we're going to see, let's call it an indirect. Once we find out what the words mean, the direct translation will become more clear that it's talking about fasting. When we read it initially, we'll see that there's not there's a what do we call it? Maybe a synonym for fasting in the verses itself. So the next text is here. It's in the book of Vayikra, chapter 16, verses 29 through 31. This is Parshas Achrei Mos, and it reads in the translation, "And all this shall be an eternal statute for you in the seventh month." Again, that's Tishrei. "On the 10th of the month, the 10th of Tishrei, you shall afflict yourselves." So this expression, "you shall afflict yourself," ta'anu is the Hebrew. So if you're familiar with some of the expressions I used before, like tainus b'chorim, with tainus is a fast. Tainus Esther, right? So the word ta'anit or tanis is from ta'anu es nafshosechem, afflict yourselves. "And you shall not do any work, neither the native nor the stranger who dwells among you. For on this day he shall effect atonement for you to cleanse you. Before God you shall be cleansed from all your sins. It is a Shabbat of rest for you." And here's the expression again, "you shall afflict yourselves." It is an eternal statute. So in describing the mitzvah and the theme of the 10th of Tishrei, Yom Kippur, the Torah describes twice this expression of ta'anu es nafshosechem, or va'anisem es nafshosechem. So it's the affliction of the soul. Now, this expression, this terminology of affliction of the soul, we find earlier in the book of Vayikra, later in the book of Vayikra, 7 chapters later, in chapter 23 of the book of Vayikra, verses 27 and 28. This is Parshas Emor, where it reads, repeating about the idea of Yom Kippur, "On the 10th of the 7th month, it is a day of atonement. It shall be a holy occasion for you," and here's the expression again, "you shall afflict yourselves. And you shall offer up a fire offering to God. You shall not perform any work on that very day, for it is a day of atonement, for you to gain atonement before the Lord your God." So we have this same expression, "Va'anisem es nafshosechem," you shall afflict your souls. So now, again, I was telling you it's like a synonym. We hear it in the expressions of like tainus Esther and tainus Cholom. So this word of anisem, or ta'anu es nafshosechem, so how do we know that this word affliction means fast? It means to fast from eating and drinking. So we have a Talmudic tractate dedicated to the holiday of Yom Kippur. It's called Tractate Yuma, Masechta Yuma. So it's a whole tractate dedicated to our understanding the laws and the practices and the meaning of Yom Kippur. So towards the end of the book, on page 74, we have one of the commentaries that explain the Talmud and help us understand how to learn the Talmud. You have a Rabbeinu Hananel. So the Rabbeinu Hananel, towards the end of Tractate Yuma, explains and helps us make it clear that this idea of afflicting your soul means to fast. He said it's written concerning Yom Kippur, afflict your souls. Inisem es nafshosechem. It is also written, I have afflicted my soul through fasting. So here he quotes from the book of Isaiah, and in the verse in the book of Isaiah, it directly links these things, explicitly linking the expression afflicting your soul to fasting. And it is further written, why have we fasted and you did not see? We've afflicted our soul and you do not know. So here, instead of linking the two, it's the expression that puts them in parallel. We afflicted our soul, we fasted, and both of these things, the same result. So it's a sort of repetitive language making a parallel between afflicting your soul and fasting. So from these verses then, from Vayikra, and made clear in the Gemara and the Talmud of Tractate Yuma, we have really the only time that the Torah commands us in the form of a mitzvah to fast. So even though fasting is, all over throughout the calendar and throughout various practices, the only explicit command to fast is on Yom Kippur. Now, we have this shuckling Jew, coming to the Ne'ilah prayer, the final prayer of Yom Kippur, and maybe some of his thoughts are thoughts you yourself have had. Get to the end of 25 long hours, maybe you had this thought. And then finally, so these thoughts that we have by the Ne'ilah prayer, wondering, or maybe you're even thinking like, can he hurry up already so he can get to the break fast? Why? Why is it that God instructs us to fast on Yom Kippur? This is the only time we have it as a mitzvah. What is the link between the themes and the spiritual energies of such a holy day and fasting? Now, there are various answers. There's lots and lots of answers. And like I said, we're going to go in different directions, ending up with our last answers coming from Hasidic teachings. But we'll just go through a few answers from classic rabbinic commentaries, classic rabbinic texts, answering this question, why do we fast on Yom Kippur? So the first answer is from, it's called the Chizikuni. And the Chizkuni is one of the biblical scholars, the biblical commentaries, and he lived a little after the time of Rashi. So he used the Rashi commentary as his primary source text, and then his commentary was explaining Rashi or asking questions and giving comments on Rashi. So it's a line I've used before, but it's maybe a good time to use it again, is that you can tell the greatness of a rabbi, or greatness really of any author, by how many books are written about his books. Right? So Moshe is the greatest of all the rabbis because look at all the books that are written about his Torah. And Rashi is right up there because there are a whole library of commentaries which are written about Rashi's commentary. So the Chizkuni is such a commentary, and he writes about the verse, and you shall afflict your souls. When the first set of tablets were given, right, giving in the Torah on Mount Sinai, it is written of the elders of the Jewish people, they perceived God as they ate and drank. So you're kind of putting the two things together, this intense revelation of godliness and food and drink. And it was a result of this excessive eating and drinking that they came to worship the golden calf. Meaning there was something missing in this approach. There was something not right in this approach to be eating and drinking while the revelation of God is going on. And that led ultimately to the worst sin, the sin of the golden calf. Therefore, the Chizkuni continues, God decreed a fast on the day the the latter set of tablets was given, which is Yom Kippur. I mean, Moshe got his 40 days of atonement, and Moshe was successful in getting forgiveness for the sin of the golden calf, and came back down with a second set of tablets on the 10th of Tishrei, on Yom Kippur. So since the Shizkuni is linking eating and drinking and spiritual revelation to degradation, so then on this special day of atonement, a special day of such a high, holy day, that's why we don't eat. So it's really like a historical commemoration. It doesn't have a direct link, according to this answer, to the day itself. We're fasting because there's a similar type of practice in Judaism that I'm thinking of. I'll throw it out to you guys. Can you think of another time in Jewish practice by the holidays where we do such a thing? Give you a chance to get your minds moving.
Which holiday?
Yeah, there's another holiday in the year where we do a similar type of thing. Again, what is the Chizkuni saying? He's saying the Jews messed up. They ate and drank on a very holy day, and that led to bad results. So Yom Kippur is a very holy day, and it's connected to like the mirror image of them eating and drinking in the golden calf. They got their atonement, so that's why we don't eat. Because eating and drinking leads to bad things on holy days. So what's another holiday we have that does like this? Okay, explain.
Well, they were having a feast, and Jewish people participated in that feast, and then that was wrong, right?
Right.
And so Esther decided to fast.
Ah, good.
3 days.
All right, that's a good one. So the fast of Esther, which is the day before Purim, you got yourself into trouble by eating, so get yourself out of trouble by not eating. Okay, that's a good one. That's not actually what I was thinking of, but that's a good one.
Nothing to do with the spice, is it?
Nope. So the one I was thinking of is Shavuos. Shavuos, when we commemorate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, there's a custom in Jewish tradition is to stay up all night learning Torah. And the reason given for why we stay up all night learning Torah on Shavuos is because the very first year that the Torah was given, all the Jews slept in. God had to come and wake everybody up because they were asleep when he was ready to reveal the Torah. So we call it Tikkun Lail Shavuos. We're fixing the night of Shavuos by, instead of sleeping through the night, we learn Torah all night. So it's where we did something wrong and we do the exact opposite in order to fix what happened as a historical commemoration to years ago. So this is the first answer which is given, is that eating and drinking leads to the golden calf. Yom Kippur atones for the golden calf, so that's why we don't eat and drink. Now, the next, I did not do that. That's pretty cool. The slide wheel moves the slides as well, not just the clicking. Okay, so the first tablets were given, the elders failed to act, and they ate and drank, so we fix it by abstaining from food and drink. Now, text number 4, this is from the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch is a fantastic work. It goes through all the mitzvahs, the way they appear, all 613 mitzvahs, the way they appear in chronological order through the 5 books of Moses. And then he explains what each mitzvah is and what it's about, how to do it, and he gives a reason for each commandment, each mitzvah. So we have a mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur. This is the mitzvah, and he explains the reason why we do it. So it's mitzvah 313, to fast on the 10th day of Tishrei, which is called Yom Kippur. As it says, on the 10th of the month, you shall afflict your souls. It is among the reasons for this mitzvah is that God, in his kindness toward all of his creations, set one day a year for them to atone for all their sins through teshuvah. Right? You have a one-day pass to fix the entire year. And what should you be busy? What do you need to do on that one day to fix everything? Teshuvah. Therefore, we were commanded to fast on this day, since food, drink, and other tangible pleasures all induce the material flesh to be drawn after base desires and sin. They impede the intellectual soul from searching after the truth, which is God's service, and his teachings that are good and sweet to all people of knowledge. It is inappropriate for a servant on the day of his judgment to come before his master with his soul obscured and addled by food and drink, and with thoughts of the flesh within him. One is judged by his actions at the time of his judgment, and therefore it is appropriate to strengthen one's soul, which is wise, and to subjugate the flesh to it on that solemn day, so that it is worthy and ready to receive its atonement, and not be obstructed by the veil of desires. The Sefer Chinuch is giving a whole different perspective. This answer is not a historical commemoration. This is more an intrinsic connection to the spirit of the day. What's the spirit of the day? Atonement. How do we get the atonement? Through the proper approach to the day, the approach of tshuva. If you'd have breakfast and a cup of coffee in the morning, you'd already start thinking about your body and lose focus on what you should be doing that day, which is spiritual repair, tshuva. And he gives this whole metaphor of the servant on his day of judgment. You know, the way you look, the way you appear, the way you act in court, that's the kind of judgment you're going to get. So instead of thinking about what's for lunch in shul, think about tshuva. So it's like removing an obstacle from being able to accomplish what you need to accomplish on such a day. That's answer number 2, a more intrinsic bond between the act of fasting and what we're doing on Yom Kippur. Now, text number 5, this is the Abravanel, and another one of the famous commentaries of the Chumash, and he expands on the idea of the Sefer Chinuch, about this intrinsic bond between what we're trying to accomplish and how fasting helps us accomplish that. So the English translation reads, true affliction of the soul refers to a person causing pain to himself by denying his desires for food, drink, sexual, and other pleasures, whether by remorse for abhorrent deeds, concern for the repercussions, or by rebuking one's soul for the depravity of its desires. All of this, and not just fasting, is true affliction of the soul. So here, this third answer is expanding the definition. Fasting just fits within a set of an expansive understanding of what affliction of the soul means. It emerges that affliction is a general term for anything that pains the soul. Therefore, God commanded, you shall afflict yourself and you shall offer a fire offering to God. This means that you should afflict your soul with tshuva, remorse, by abandoning wicked deeds and ceasing evil thoughts, for all of this is included in the affliction of the soul. And through this, you will bring a fire offering to God. Here he gives a very interesting concept. He shows how we can give a personal sacrifice on Yom Kippur. How is this? It's achieved by fasting. Because an offering is made of their own blood and fat that was reduced by their affliction. It is as though when the Torah said, and you shall bring a fire offering to God, it means that you should offer yourself as an offering to God. Therefore, the Torah juxtaposed bringing the offering with affliction of the soul. It's a fascinating thing. He actually shifted the words of the verse that prescribe fasting. When it comes to affliction of the soul, he's saying that that's really all things physical. Anything that brings you a distracting level of physical pleasure, that's not appropriate for Yom Kippur. That's what affliction of the soul means. And then after affliction of the soul, says then bring a sacrifice. How do we bring a sacrifice nowadays? By losing flesh and blood. And how do we lose the flesh and blood? That is specifically through the fasting. So again, we have an objective, which is atonement. We have a mechanism to attain atonement, which is tshuva, and we have this prescription of affliction and fasting as a way of keeping us in that track, keeping us focused on the goal of atonement. Now, again, it's fascinating to think of it this way, that you're offering yourself, your flesh and blood, as a sacrifice, the same way you would offer an animal sacrifice. Now, this is all, let's say, kind of a, how do I put this? Even though there's a bond between the fasting and the atonement, we're showing like a cause and effect relationship, or maybe preventing us from missing the atonement. But another way that the rabbis look at this is that, well, it doesn't show an essential bond between the two. Meaning if you were on a higher level and you ate in a way that was spiritual, then you wouldn't need to fast. And another way, like I think this maybe the inverse of that, is that we might be so low that if we didn't have our coffee, we're so preoccupied the whole day with not eating, we can't get into the spirituality of the day because we're so busy thinking about, oh, I missed my toast, whatever it is. So these themes of fasting and affliction really set kind of like a negative connotation. Like we have this weakness of eating. And it's only to remove the weakness so that we can take advantage, it really puts everything in a very negative light. Now, this next commentary, I left off part of that. Text 5. I didn't do the click. So the end of text 5 reads, the purpose of fasting and desisting from work on this sanctified day, that thereby the soul is secluded so that it may cleave to God. Whereas the flesh, which desires temporal things, is weakened. The part that thirsts for eternal things, the mind, is strengthened, which is a similar thing, which was what the Sefer Chinuch was saying. Okay, now, this next part, which we'll see in the next text 6, is that there's a concept that offering to God your heart, that's the most pleasing offering. Now, food and drink are an obstacle to that. They impede offering the heart, and we are looking to strengthen the soul in this time. So the fasting is that the soul should be able to cleave to God, as Rabbanel just said in text 5. Now, this next level, though, we're going to see, that the Alshach explains, is that God, interesting language in the verse, it takes maybe a little bit of introduction, but the interesting language in text 1 was talking about how it's a eternal statute. Now, the translation of statute is from the word chok. Now, chok, by way of introduction, the rabbis break up the mitzvahs into various categories, right? So one category, which we're all kind of familiar with, is the prohibitions and the prescriptions, the things that you shouldn't do, like don't kill, don't steal, no adultery, and the things that you should do, like shake a lulav and esrog and sukkot and blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So that's one way of dividing the mitzvahs. Another way of dividing the mitzvahs is into 3 categories. Now these 3 categories are what we call mishpatim, edus, and chukim. So mishpatim, these are what we call like the laws of justice, where they make perfect sense to us. And the rabbis explain it that even if the Torah wouldn't have commanded any of the mitzvahs, we would still have come up with most of these ourselves. Like again, not to kill and not to steal and to honor contracts and to have just scales. These are things which civilizations throughout history and all around the world come up with some version of these same type of laws. Then you have what's called edus. Now, edus translates as like testimonies. These are the historical narrations where we might not necessarily have thought of these ourselves, but once we realize that they're commemorating something historically, then they make sense. An example of such a mitzvah in Judaism is eating matzah on Passover, where the Torah tells us because we left in such haste, there wasn't time for the dough to rise, we were leaving so fast, so that's why we don't eat leavened bread to commemorate the haste in which we left Egypt. So we might not have thought of flatbread ourselves, right? We might have thought of something else, but once we already have matzah as a mitzvah, it makes sense. Now again, this is something which all of the civilizations have. You have commemorative events and activities for special days in history, like in in America, we have the 4th of July, like an Independence Day, where I'm not sure exactly, we would have thought this ourselves, to blow stuff up in the sky and eat barbecue, but, now that we're doing it already to commemorate our independence, why not? And again, you have these throughout world cultures and world civilizations. This final category, the category of chukim, A chok is what we translated as a statute. The rabbis elaborate what it means a statute. It says it's a decree of the king. We only do it because the king told us to. These are the things that transcend reason. They don't make sense to us. So one of the classic examples of chukim is the chok of the Torah. The verse tells us is the red heifer. I mean, in general, ritual purity, the whole category falls into this one. But the red heifer, where we take an ox, a bull, and then we slaughter it and burn it, and then we sprinkle the ashes into some water, and then we sprinkle the ash water onto somebody, and now they'll be ritually pure from contact with the dead. Doesn't make any sense. It especially doesn't make sense because it purifies from the most intense impurity, but the process of making it takes someone who's pure and turns them impure. So how does that make sense? The whole thing doesn't make any sense, but this is a mitzvah, and God commanded it to be this way, so we do it. So that's what we call chukim. The statutes, the decrees of the king, we only do because the king commanded them. So we had a handful of explanations why we fast on Yom Kippur, and they're all reasons, right? They all kind of make sense. They might be framed negatively, but they all make sense. This is why you fast on Yom Kippur, in order to accomplish a certain objective. Now, the next commentary, the commentary of the Alshich, is going to ask, well, wait a second. The verse tells us that it's a chok. The verse tells us that the reason we fast on Yom Kippur, we do the affliction of your soul, is because God commanded it. And it's in this category of that doesn't make sense. So if we have a reason, how could it be a chok? Or the other way, if it's a chok, then there isn't a reason for it. None of your reasons that you give are the reasons. That's considering we have those explanations, why does God declare the fast to be a chok, a statute? And the ideal scenario is that we would, this is what the Alshach is going to say, in the ideal scenario, we should be doing it just because God said so. It's only because we're not holding where we should be that we fast for a reason. But if you would be doing it at the highest level, you would only be doing it because God said so. Just do not let the thought arise in your mind that I desire the affliction of your soul. If only it were a chukat olam, to afflict yourselves. If only it were just because God said so. So that you would not need this affliction and would only perform it as a chok without any reason, since you're already assured of atonement. So fasting is essentially what he's saying is ideal when it has no direct connection to the tshuva. The tshuva is coming just because this is a holy day. It's not fit preparation or, you're removing an obstacle. That's the ideal way of fasting on Yom Kippur, is because God said so. Now, we have the next text, text 6b. There are people coming in and out. All right. So text 6b, this is also from the Alshach, but in here it's in Parshas Emor, because the first text is where we saw it in Parshas Achrei Mos. Here is where we see it later in Parshas Emor. So he continues with the explanation. He says, as a physician acts with the patient, so does God act with his people during the days of all, when he judges them. When a doctor heals a patient of a stomach filled with the refuse of food waste and wishes to purge him, he will not do so all at once. Rather, 3 days before, he will first give him a daily drink to soften and dislodge the toughest waste stuck in the stomach. And following this comes the purge when all is cleansed. So too, one fasts on the day, it says preceding, but I think this translates better as the day after, because we don't fast the day before Yom Kippur, before Rosh Hashanah. So it's also the Hebrew who doesn't translate as acher. We fast after Rosh Hashanah in the Hebrew, but whatever, it translates here as preceding. So too on the days following Rosh Hashanah, after which is Rosh Hashanah, the first of the 10 days of repentance, when he begins to undo the fetters of wickedness, and gradually, day by day, so that afterwards in Yom Kippur they will afflict their souls. And with the help of the power of the day and its rituals, then all will be completely purged without leaving any remnants. They'll be cleansed of his iniquity and from the sickness of impurity. So here, the Alshach is giving a similar commentary like we saw before, which is the idea that the fasting is a cleansing process. The fasting is helping us remove from the body the materialism. Now, this puts a slightly more positive spin on Yom Kippur fast. The idea that food and drink are bodily concerns. And it's because of the involvement in the bodily concerns that we fall into interest of materialism. Now, Yom Kippur, which is a spiritual day, a day which is a revelation of God and it's a spiritual focus, that's why we fast, because it's fitting. It's like the reverse of this formula. If you eat, you become more bodily. If you become bodily, then you become material. So the other way around, the opposite of material is spiritual. And since Yom Kippur is spiritual, so then we fast. So these are a handful of the classic commentaries. So the question we leave off with in the first section, though, and hopefully we'll get to tonight and we'll walk away with, is these all still seem very negative. They seem like a weakness in food and drink. So what we're going to try to find, or can we find, a more positive and inspiring reason for why we fast on Yom Kippur. All right.
But don't we eat it to also elevate the spark?
Yeah.
So it's not just bodily concerns, right?
Right. Yeah, that's the ideal state. That was what he was speaking before. It should only be in the ideal state that we're only fasting because God said so, not because eating and drinking is something that brings us down. So I guess we have to be honest with ourselves where we're holding. Did dinner lift me up or did dinner bring me down? Is it a good appetizer for learning Torah or does it distract me and make me want to sit on the couch? All right. So our goal in part 2 of tonight's class is to find an uplifting, inspiring reason for why we fast. Okay, so until now, we've been describing Yom Kippur as a day that has a theme, right? A day of atonement, which is the energy that God is revealing on Yom Kippur, and a day of tshuva. That's the activity, that's the work that we do. Because God makes it possible for this one holy day for us to atone for the entire year, that's why we do the work of tshuva. Now, until now, all the commentaries which we've been saying is saying that helps us understand the fast because that helps us focus our energies on spirituality, on the task at hand. Now, we do other things to keep us focused on spirituality, right? Like we try to dress like angels and wear white clothes, and we stay in shul pretty much the whole day. We try to be in prayer the whole time, and any time in between prayers, you're supposed to be saying verses of Tehillim so that you're constantly involved in this service.
They turn on all the yard site lights.
Yeah, the candles are effective for spiritual contemplation. So this is all true now. But in order to get to an inspiring and motivating and positive reason for why we fast on Yom Kippur, we're going to go back in time to what Yom Kippur was like in Jerusalem in the temple. Because in the verses, besides describing mitzvah to fast, the verses also describe all of the work that the high priest would do in the temple on Yom Kippur. All the unique sacrifices, all the unique order of service. We have the goats that we're not talking about this year, but there's a whole fascinating thing to talk about with the scapegoats and all kinds of stuff going on in Yom Kippur. So here it's much more, let's call it, it was a physical, tangible, prescribed work to do in the temple, which made us understand what Yom Kippur is all about. Now, the defining service of the day is what we call keteris, incense. See, the pinnacle of all the things that the Kohen Gadol would do is he had once a year access to the Holy of Holies. Now, when we say the Holy of Holies, what we mean is that there's varying degrees of holiness in the temple, and the innermost sanctum of the temple is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and it was inside the Holies, and behind another curtain was the Holy of Holies, and that was restricted. No one was ever allowed to go in the Holy of Holies, with the exception of the high priest, with the exception of Yom Kippur. The high priest could only go on Yom Kippur. So in order to go in this height of Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies, it had to be with the service of the incense offering. Now, incense, in fact, was a twice-a-day sacrifice every day in the temple. But there was a special type of incense which was offered only on Yom Kippur in order for the Kohen Gadol to go into the Holy of Holies. That's where we see, let me get past that slide. Here we go. Text 7a, Vayikra, chapter 16, back there, but at the beginning of the chapter, in Parshat Acharei Mos again, says, God said to Moses, speak to your brother Aaron, who at that time was the high priest, that he should not come at all times into the holy within the dividing curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, so that he should not die, for I appear over the ark cover in a cloud. Now, so this is the prohibition against the high priest or anyone going into the Holy of Holies. Now, if I were to ask you, where's the incense offering here in this verse? Is it obvious that we're talking about an incense sacrifice in this verse? Anybody want to guess where in this verse so we have an allusion to incense offerings?
Where's the
Cloud, maybe?
cloud? That's what I was going to say, the
Ah.
cloud.
Very good. For I appear over the ark cover in a cloud. Very good. So that's, if you take that verse and you look into the commentaries, so Rashi is there and picks up and says, for I appear in a cloud, quoting that verse, that part of the verse in the Torah, Rashi explains, for I continuously appear there with my pillar of cloud. And therefore, since my divine presence is revealed there, he must be careful not to accustom himself to enter. This is the simple meaning. So the simple meaning of that verse, there is no mention of incense. The cloud at the end of the verse is talking about how God appears. But according to the Medrash, another way of learning this verse, he shall not come except with the cloud. The cloud is how he gets in. And that's the cloud of incense on Yom Kippur. That's how Rashi explains this unique access to the Holy of Holies on this unique day on Yom Kippur to this unique individual, the Kohen Gadol. The way you get in, you still need keys, even though you've got all the exceptions. The Kohen Gadol and on Yom Kippur, you still need the key, which is the Keteris, which is the incense. Now, text 7c, Vayikra, which is a little bit later in that same chapter, 10 verses later, and 12 and 13 there, chapter 16. So it says, and he shall take a pan full of burning coals from upon the altar, from before God, and put in both hands full of fine incense, and bring it within this dividing curtain, which was in verse 2. And he shall place the incense upon the fire before God, so that the cloud of the incense shall envelop the ark cover that is over the tablet of testimony, so that he shall not die. This is the verse. This is explaining how Keteris is this main, it's the headline event of what's going on of the service of the high priest and Yom Kippur in the temple. Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, in this next text, from the Mishnah Torah, his code of Jewish law, has a whole section on the laws of the Yom Kippur service, the laws of what the Kohen Gadol would do in the temple. In chapter 4 there, laws 6, 7, 8 through 9, we have excerpts from each of those laws. Maimonides describes this ritual in great detail. So we'll go through some of it now. That he takes the fire pan and uses it to remove burning coals from the altars. That was what we saw in the previous verse, right? And then he places it upon the projection in the temple courtyard. The kaf which is a large spoon-like utensil used in the temple, is taken out for him in a container filled with incense that is extremely fine. And he would fill both hands from it, from this container of the incense, and put it, the handfuls of an incense, into the kaf. He then carries the fire pan in his right hand, and the kaf with the incense in his left hand, and he proceeds through the outer section of the sanctuary until he reaches the Holy of Holies. He finds the pareches, of the dividing curtain, folded over, which means it's open. He proceeds into the Holy of Holies until he reaches the Ark of the Covenant, and when he reaches the Ark, he places the fire pan down between the two staves, the two poles that you have on each side of the Ark. In the second temple, where there was no Ark, he would place it on the foundation stone. So you can kind of visualize what's going on. Now, Maimonides concludes, he says, he would pile the incense over the coals with his hands on the inner portion of the fire pan, so the incense would be close to the ark and far from his face, so he would not get burned. He waits there until the entire chamber fills up with smoke and then departs, walking backwards little by little with his face to the Holy of Holies and his back to the outer sanctuary until he departs from within the pareches, the dividing curtain.
What's in the incense? What kind of herb?
What are in the Siddur I could show you all the different things. A lot of times I don't. Yeah, it's a list of 11 spices. Some of them I don't know what they mean. Even the English words I'm not sure what they mean. Like I'm not sure like like Frank Nard. I'm not sure what
garlic powder.
Interesting because two things are interesting about it. First of all, there's a prohibition against mixing at the same proportions. Even if it's a small batch, you're not allowed to mix this into spices of the incense for personal consumption. That's number one. Number two, there was, you guys know the movie Indiana Jones?
Yeah.
You know, so Indiana Jones is actually based off of a real person. His name was Vendell Jones. He passed away a few years ago. He was an archaeologist and an interesting character. And he was searching for the Ark, just like Indiana Jones in his professional life. And he did a lot of excavation work in Israel trying to find the Ark. And he got on the trail, and he actually found a year's supply of incense, exactly mixed according to the proportions that are described in the Torah.
Wow.
So he found the stash of temple era incense.
Wow.
And they were able to do the chemistry test to see exactly what's in there, and it was the right proportion for temple incense. Now, so we have, hopefully I've built up enough that the incense is a crucial component of the service of Yom Kippur, right? If part one we were building up how important it is to fast and why, here we have an important component of what it was like in the temple. Of the pinnacle of the day was this incense offering going into the Holy of Holies. But why? So in order to answer the question, why was the incense so important, which we're doing all of this just so we can answer how can we be uplifted by the approach to fasting. So in order to understand what's so important about the incense offering, we're going to contrast the incense offering to a more typical animal offering. Now, the animal offering and the incense offering, one of the differences besides what was being offered, an animal, a live animal versus some spices. So besides that, the difference was location. Here, we see that the incense was offered in an altar inside the Holy of Holies. Now this one was unique. It was offered in the fire pan all the way in. But before you get to the Holy of Holies, in just the Holies, you have an incense altar, a small altar behind the first curtain, together where the menorah is. You have also an incense altar. The animal sacrifices, they were offered on what's called the outer altar, which is a large altar in the middle of the courtyard of the temple. So these inner and outer altars, according to Chassidus, this is where we're going to start getting into the Chassidic explanation. According to Chassidus, the location of the various offers teaches us the significant difference between the nature and function of the different sacrifices. What are they all about? That's making sense of the incense offering. We have the difference between animal offerings and incense offerings. So the animal offering is offered on the outdoor altar. The incense offering is offered on the indoor altar. Now, what we'll see what Chassidus explains is that this larger altar signifies our sublimation of physicality. We talked before about why we're fasting is because physicality can lead us astray, let's say, from our spiritual growth. So by the concept of an outer altar and offering our animal on the outer altar is to sublimate that physicality and come closer to God. Whereas the incense offering is a more inner mode of service. That's why it's on the inside, so to say. So what is inner service for us? That is not sublimation of the physicality, but rather the awakening of our spirituality and the essential bond of the spirit to God. Let's see how Chassidus explains this. This is from Lakutei Sichos, the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it reads, it has been explained in various texts that there is a broad, fundamental distinction between the sacrificial rite performed on the outer altar and the keteris rite on the inner altar. Offering sacrifices on the outer altar symbolizes the sublimation of the physical to God. Man's impact on the objects of the world outside of himself, elevating them to God. That's what we're doing with the animal. However, the central feature of keteris on the inner altar is not about sublimating physical matter. Rather, the priest's entry within the sanctuary is to experience keteris and connection with God through this offering of fire, incense, and cloud. Now, keteris, the word keteris is connected to the Aramaic word of katar, which means connection. So the idea when he says experience keteris is a play on words, that the Kohen Gadol is experiencing connection to God. The priests are this spiritual connection, not sublimation of the physicality, but rather connection through spirituality, through the soul. So the incense represents this inner mode, and the animals represent the outer mode. Now, we're going to dive a layer deeper. The layer that we'll dive deeper is that these two altars also correspond to two layers of consciousness, the way Chassidus explains. We have two layers, two dimensions of consciousness, and each layer is represented by the various modes of the two altars. Over that part. Here's the Chassidic explanation. In a personal sense, the sacrificial service on the outer altar is a service of the outer heart. That's this first level of consciousness. Operating in man's external dimensions. It ensures that man fulfills the divine will in his thought, speech, and deed. The garments of man's soul, as opposed to the soul itself. That's the way the Chassidus describes this idea of thought, speech, and action. This is the way the soul expresses itself. We call it a garment, a levush, the same way like we have a certain level of personal expression by the clothes we wear. You can see the physical nature of a person through their clothes, that's revealed, but that's all the external parts. And our interaction with the external world is to what we say and what we do, right? And what we think about, what the stimulus around us. That's all external. The service of the incense on the inner altar is the fusion of man and God through the revelation of his inner soul, which is bound with God. This revelation automatically impacts his thought, speech, and deed and to be as they should, in line with the divine will. So here, instead of, from the outside in, it's from the inside out. That's the second layer of consciousness. This notion is alluded to in the distinction between the Hebrew words of karbanos and keteris. Korban is related to the word of kiruv, closeness. For through the karbanot, man draws near to God. However, it is still possible that he remains a separate entity, albeit close to God. However, the word keteris connotes connection and being bound, because the theme of keteris is not just that man draws near to God through his service of God in thought, speech, and deed, but that he becomes tied and connected with God. All right. I threw a lot of Hasidic ideas at you, quick, and parallels of altars and layers of consciousness, these type of things. So the next step we want to do is try to translate the terms of layers of consciousness, internal and external garments of the soul, and translate it into practical examples and how we should approach these levels in everyday terms. So the first example is, which is also brought in Chassidus, is like the example of an employer and an employee. So the employer and employee, they come together, they're close because of some shared objective, right? They mutually share the objective of their own reward. So the employer and the employee are bound by these two things. There's not necessarily a relationship outside of this shared interest. So because they have this shared interest, their interests align, the relationship is transactional. The boss wants this to get done. The boss, the employer, and the employee are both convinced that if these things get done, they'll both gain. The employer needs something to get done, so he gives an instruction to an employee, and the employee does it. And what does the employer give to the employee as a result of this benefit? Pay, right? And if the business does well for the employer, then he has the money to pay the employee. So it's all very transactional. It's an exchange. And it's in this exchange that everybody wins. Now, that's what we mean by sacrifices. The sacrifice is, okay, we've come to agree that this is what God wants, and it's in my interest to do what God wants, so I have to sacrifice something of myself. We call it your thought, speech, and action. Your external layer of who you are, you give of yourself for God, but it's like an exchange. Meaning, were there not to be this mutually beneficent exchange, then you wouldn't do it. And you have to kind of sacrifice in order to come close. Now, the other example of keteris, could be understood not by an exchange, not by this transactional type relationship of employer-employee, but instead of a bond, a unity between two lovers. The lovers could be spouses, a man and a woman. Lovers could be friends, close friends, where you're not again, in the ideal state between two lovers who are close, you don't do something for your lover in the exchange that you should get something back for it. You do something for the person you love because you love them. Because you're bound by the relationship, what you give to the other is really fulfilling you. And you don't even have to even be asked. At the highest level of a loving relationship between, let's say, two friends, the close friend doesn't even need to be asked in order to recognize and fulfill the needs of the other, right? You see your friend is down, you can just see it because you're their friend. And you don't have to wait for them to ask, could you tell me a joke, make me feel better. You see that they're having a tough day and you reach out to them, you know what to do because of the closeness. So that's what's going on with keteris. The level of keteris, this level of service of God, is that it's a unity. It's a oneness that's being revealed. And that oneness, that unity that's revealed is what the whole theme, the whole mode of Yom Kippur is. Okay, so we have the different sacrifices. So the carbon is the external connection. Keteris is the internal connection. In our examples, we have the boss and the employee relationship. That's an external connection. But the relationship between two lovers, the relationship between a spouse, that represents the Keteris. So what are we doing on Yom Kippur? What's the main service? There is a level of sacrifice. That's what we said in the first part, right? By not fasting, by not eating, by fasting, you're giving up your blood and your flesh and everything. That's a certain level of sacrifice. But the main service of Yom Kippur is a level of Keteris, a level of connection. So tshuva, what's the bond of tshuva and Keteris? Tshuva is not about externalities. Tshuva is not about giving something up. Tshuva is about working on the relationship. Now, so what does it mean? When you do tshuva, you're fixing something you did wrong. The thing that you did wrong is only on the outer level, only on the level of actions, thoughts, words, the outer level of who you are. Inner level of your soul, you're always bound to God. So there's one superficial level of tshuva, which is just to repair the actual actions that you did wrong. But the deeper level of tshuva is to reawaken that essential bond of the soul. So which one is Yom Kippur about? The highest level of Yom Kippur is Keteris, recovering the essential relationship with God. All right, so I think this is the last text of this part, maybe. No, one more text after that. So text 9c, this is again from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is a Hasidic explanation of the service of Yom Kippur. It says, the Yom Kippur service, the high priest entering within to offer Keteris on behalf of all the Jewish people, represents the entry of every Jew's inner self into the most sanctified, innermost place in the world, which is united with God's sanctity that rests there. And this is precisely why Yom Kippur affects atonement. The entire concept of sin and transgression, as the Navi explains, separate between you and your God, only exists from a perspective where the Jewish people are a separate entity, and their connection to God is only fulfilled by following His instructions, like the employer and the employee. Thus, when they transgress God's command, heaven forfend, this bond is weakened. However, when the inner soul, which remains faithful to and inextricably bound with God, even at the time of the sin, is revealed within the Jewish people, from this perspective, the sins and transgressions which were committed with the person's external faculties are nullified. So, the example that you could think of is, okay, so right now we're in prep mode in my house, preparing for Yom Tif, all the challah baking and food making and everything. So imagine all the hard work that goes into making like a chicken soup for Yom Tif. With the peeling of the vegetables and the spices and everything, the boiling and the preparing, so you have a chicken soup. So this has happened a few times in my house where the work is all done and it's being cooked, and the cooks are tired, right? So they say to me, who does less of that hard work, you're going to anyways be up, so before you go to bed, could you take the soup off the stove or take the chicken out of the oven, whichever it is, and put it away before you go to bed? Okay, fine. So here your spouse works so hard on a project, and they ask you to just put it away to make sure, when you're done, put it all away, and you forget. Your mind gets distracted, you go somewhere else in your mind, and then you leave the chicken soup on the stove the whole night.
You didn't do it.
You didn't do it, right? Yeah. If you would have done all the hard work, there's no way you could forget.
Right.
But since it's not so connected to you, so you forgot, and it gets ruined. Now, you're whoever it is that worked on the project that got ruined wakes up and sees, forgot, it's ruined, what's going to be, there's tension in the relationship, right? There's anger, maybe, God forbid, but things are rough. So the person who messed up, whichever spouse it is, whichever project you're using in your mind, the person who messed up is thinking, I've got to fix this. So quick, I have to get in the example of the soup, I got to get a replacement for the soup. Break out the awesome soup mix. Go to the store quick and get broth, whatever it is. Like the Yom Tif is here, I have to fix it. And what you're trying to do in this level of tshuva is just repair the spoiled soup. But that's not the essence of the relationship. That's not the bond. The relationship doesn't depend on chicken soup. The relationship is an essential bond between two souls. So from the deeper level of repair of the spoiled soup is to work on reuniting in the depths of the relationship. Now, so you touched right on it. If you would have done the work, meaning if you would have truly sensed how important this is to me, if you would feel what's important to me, there's no way you could have forgotten. That's the deeper aspect of tshuva, is that you connect in a profound way to what's important to your spouse, and there's no way you could forget. By focusing on the depth of the relationship, that's the terrace level of tshuva that the Rebbe is talking about here. Okay, so now we have one more text 10. Now, this text 10, this profound depth of the relationship we just uncovered in my chicken soup story, this helps us understand a fascinating story which is told in the Talmud. Again, Tractate Yuma for the holiday of Yom Kippur. That was a very fascinating story. It says, it happened that one Yom Kippur, a certain high priest, who was a crypto-Saduki. You guys know what that means? Okay, we'll leave on the side. If you're interested in knowing what Sadukis are, I'll tell you afterwards. So anyways, he's a crypto-Saduki, deliberately subverted the traditional method of incense offering by burning the incense outside the Holy of Holies and then bringing it in. Right? Maimonides, we already learned earlier tonight, explained how you're supposed to burn it inside the Holy of Holies. Here you're burning it outside.
Was this Suzuki a high priest?
Yeah. Yeah. We had a long stretch where the high priests were not the best suited for the job necessarily. When he emerged, he said to his father, although you have expounded upon these laws your entire life, you have not properly fulfilled the incense burning until this man, referring to himself, stood up and did it. He replied to him, even though we expounded our entire lives, we did it stage as wished. I would be surprised if that man, talking about his own son, has many more days left in this world. It is said that it wasn't long before he died. Others say that he emerged from the Holy of Holies with worms coming out of his nose, and that a sort of calf hoof of an angel came out of the Holy of Holies and kicked him in his forehead, and he immediately died. This is quite a story of the Talmud. So it was asked of Rabbi Abahu, does it not say that even the angels should not be in the tent of meeting? How then could this high priest have been kicked in by an angel there? So he answered, the angels are barred from being in the Holy of Holies with the high priest only when he enters properly. Now this whole story is a fascinating story. There's lots to unpack over there. But the main idea of what this text illustrates is that there's like the spouse relationship as a metaphor, there's this exclusivity of the essence of the soul and God. And the main point to take away from this is not the Saduki and not how he got kicked, but the last lines over there, that even an angel doesn't belong there. This profound unity of soul and God, of oneness between the soul and God, that even an angel can't mix in. And that is the level of tshuva. That's the approach we have, the terrace level that we have on Yom Kippur. All right. So now, all fascinating, right? All very interesting stuff. What's going on with the Kohen Gadol? Maybe we're even able to imagine in our minds, visualize in our mind's eye what it was like in the temple. Background, insight to incense, and the different nature of sacrifices. But I told you this was going to help us understand why we fast. What does all this have to do with fasting on Yom Kippur? Right? Let's put it all back together in the time we have left. We have 2 minutes to put it all back together. So the answer is like this. This is from our Rebbe again, Torah Menachem, about 32 years ago. Because in truth, we don't need to be commanded regarding this on fasting. On Tisha B'Av, who can eat? And on Yom Kippur, who wants to eat? Talks about this high level and the layers of consciousness and body and soul, all of these big ideas. It boils down quite simply to on Tisha B'Av, who can eat? And on Yom Kippur, who wants to eat? So the way we can explain this, we have, has anyone ever been to like the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., or the one here in town, or Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, any of these places? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. And on the side of the room, you guys have been to any of these museums?
Can't go.
Can't go. Okay, that's even, that emotion fits for why I bring it up as well. So you go to these places, and it's just so heavy. And the words can't describe the emotional response, especially if you have family or a direct personal connection to the tragedy. So as you walk out of the museum, it says Tisha B'Av, who can eat? You're not thinking about like, okay, that was interesting museum. Where are we going to do lunch? You can't eat. You have the documentaries by Steven Spielberg or Schindler's List. These are not popcorn movies. Right. They're heavy, intense events. So it's not a thing. Who could eat at a time at a moment like that? That's the first line on Tisha B'Av, who can eat. When it comes to Yom Kippur, it says who wants to eat. So when we've taken these relationship metaphors, a boss, employer and employee, pizza, that's a great motivator, right? Anybody can eat at work. But when it comes to a relationship of two lovers, imagine, you talk about the expression of being lovesick. A young, passionate, new love, you could get so caught up in the time spent together, you could forget to eat, right? Same thing, maybe not in a relationship perspective, but you have things like you get immersed in a project. Maybe it's a good book. Maybe it's something at work. You could go a whole day and you forgot to eat because you're so immersed in the moment. So Yom Kippur, who wants to eat? When you're approaching Yom Kippur on this level of keteris, level of the essential bond of the soul to God, who even wants to eat? You're completely wrapped up in the moment of spirituality and connection. So that's this. We'll find a couple more slides. So text 12 is from the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. No, sorry, the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tanakh Tzedek. This is Torah on Shir Shirim, and the Song of Songs from King Solomon. So he explains over here that the verse in Shir Shirim states, "My dove," this is God talking about the Jewish people, "in the clefts of the rock." So the explanation is that the Jewish people are referred to as a dove in the verse, as it is stated, your eyes are like doves. The meaning of this is like the analogy of a pair of doves, male and female, whose entire pleasure and satisfaction is from gazing at one another. So that's us. So it is said of Israel, let Israel rejoice in their Maker. And that is by gazing at the glory of the King, by contemplating on the greatness of the blessed Creator. So when we talk about young love and passionate love and just losing track of time and not wanting to eat, that's what Shir Shirim is talking about. God called us his doves because we could spend all day in shul thinking about the greatness of God, and forget to eat. So that loss of appetite is, in Hasidic terminology, is from weakening your self-interest. See, even from a holy perspective, when we eat, even for an elevated purpose, it's because we're doing our mission. This is what we were sent here to do. We're actualizing ourselves. On Yom Kippur, we have this opportunity to gaze at the glory of the Creator and lose ourselves. And when we lose ourselves at this level, we forget everything bodily. And then it's like, who could eat? Now, here we go back to the fast. Now we have a perspective, a positive, inspiring perspective for the fast. So let's just jump over because we're getting late. Text 13. This is from the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber. This was 110 years ago that it was said about Yom Kippur. So he says the difference between Shabbos and Yom Kippur is that it's a mitzvah to indulge Shabbos with food and drink, representing a state of palpable pleasure. But in Yom Kippur, it's forbidden to eat or drink. On the contrary, one must afflict the soul with the 5 afflictions. This is because Yom Kippur is akin to the Messianic era. It is a state of imperceptible pleasure, and therefore all perceptible pleasure is prohibited on Yom Kippur. On the contrary, there must be affliction, the opposite of indulgence, as it says in the verse, "You shall afflict your souls," which refers to the soul that through this affliction it will cease to experience all palpable pleasure and reach a state of imperceptible pleasure. So again, we're breaking through barriers, but for a whole different reason now. You're getting to this high state, and to achieve this state of pleasure as it exists within God Himself, it cannot be by the standard fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, but only through tshuva from the depths of the heart, which reaches God Himself. All right. Now I got worked up. It's loving. It's intense. It's essential. Who could possibly eat at a time like this? Now, unfortunately, not everybody feels this way in Yom Kippur, right? This is the ideal state, to be spiritual, to be elevated, but not everybody's feeling this way. You know, a lot of people are thinking about their headache or their cup of coffee or the nap they need or whatever it is. So because we're not all operating in this very high level described in here tonight in class and in Chassidus, so we do reverse engineering. If we say that you would get there and then you couldn't even think to eat, so we reverse engineer by not eating. And then hopefully by the end of the day, when it comes to Ne'ilah, by then, that's when we can feel a little bit like this way. We can feel a little bit of our soul breaking through. And that brings us to the last idea, which is that we were talking about how in the verse, the mitzvah to fast is called an affliction of the soul. But on a simple level, isn't fasting an affliction of the body? You would think, it makes more sense to talk about what level of affliction this is to afflict the body. Particularly once we've built it all up in Chassidus. Like, once the soul's all going and excited, then who could even eat? It's not an affliction. This is like the ideal state. So in the last text we have, the affliction of the soul, that the real purpose of the fasting is to deny the body and then shake the soul free. And through that shaking the soul free, we have the reorienting of the soul. Now, this highest point of where the soul gets reoriented and it gets its highest pleasure is by the prayer of Ne'ilah. Right? So we're familiar with all the different prayers. So every day of the year, there's 3 prayers. There's the prayer of the Mariv, the evening prayer when the day begins. There's the Shacharis prayer, the morning prayer when the morning begins. And then you have the midday prayer, the Mincha. And go every day like this way. Now, on our holy days, our special days like Shabbos and festivals and Rosh Chodesh, we add a 4th prayer. What's called the Musaf prayer, the additional offering, which comes after Shacharis but before Mincha. Now, on one day a year, we have the prayer of Ne'ilah, the fifth prayer, which is which is like right after Mincha, before Mariv of the new day, the day after Yom Kippur. So this Ne'ilah is translated literally as the closing, right? I'm sure you all heard this, like the Ne'ilah is the closing of the gates, right? We've had the Book of Life open since Rosh Hashanah, and we're working on getting ourselves signed and sealed for a good year. The gate's about to close on what's going to be, so we're rushing in to get our final prayers of the gate. Now, Rashi, in the next text, explains the reason for this term, Ne'ilah. So Rashi explains that it is found or explained in the Jerusalem Talmud that there are those who say that the name Ne'ilah refers to the closing of temple gates. That's the traditional understanding. While some say that it refers to the closing of the gates of heaven, which are closed towards evening with the conclusion of the prayer. Now, this expression of Rashi, the Lubavitcher Rebbe picks up on and gives us like the Hasidic twist, which beautifully captures the idea. This is the Rebbe and L'Kutei Sichos is within the Ne'ilah prayers revealed the deepest part of the soul, which is united with God, in which there is nothing but God with Jewish people. And this is the meaning of Ne'ilah. All the doors are closed so that no one else may enter. Inside, only the Jewish people together with God himself may be found. That's the reverse engineering. We may not enter into Yom Kippur on the level that we're like husband and wife and keteris and bound up and elevated and who could eat. But if we do a little reverse engineering and we fast the whole Yom Kippur, hopefully by the end, when we get to Ne'ilah, even those of us who need to do it backwards will appreciate this moment, this closing moments of the high holidays where we're alone together with God. All right. So hopefully that connected the dots.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Were the Suzukis around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple?
Yeah.
And were they part of that story?
And after. The Tzedukim continued afterwards also. So they started really with the Mishnah. So you have, and they continued all the way through the times of the Talmud after the destruction of the temple and many hundred years afterwards. So the Tzedukim are from Tzadok and Baitus. So those are two students. And they got really turned off by the idea of serving God without the sake of reward. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, in the first chapter, which says you should not be like a servant who serves his master for the sake of reward, which is appropriate because it's the metaphor we used earlier, the employer-employee relationship. So it says, do not be like the servant who serves his master for the sake of reward. Instead, you should be like the servant who serves his master just for the sake of service.
And do they have anything to do with that story about the guy that they gets invited to the party by mistake?
I don't think so.
They weren't.
No, you're talking about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Tzedukim from Tzadok and Baitus, so they heard this and they say, wait a second, there's no reward. So if there's no reward, that means what we do doesn't matter. If what we do doesn't matter, then why are we doing all this? So all this that we're doing, if it has no real meaning, that's just how they interpreted what they heard from their teacher, then what the rabbis tell us is meaningless. So the Baitusim and the Tzadukim, Sadukis, they rejected the authority of oral tradition. They rejected the rabbinic interpretations of Torah.
Then how did they get to be in a position of being the head priest if they didn't believe it?
Well, a lot of times the priests were appointed by outside forces. In order to control the centralized Jewish experience, it would be best for the oppressive government to have a high priest friendly to their cause. So they would appoint a high priest from the outside. So that's what the Tzedukim are. The Tzedukim are this breakaway French group that rejected the authority of rabbinic tradition and then just kept Judaism according to, they're what you call in English, I think, fundamentalists. Okay. So in English, you call someone a fundamentalist. It means they take the words of the Torah, of the Bible, literally, and they try to live their life according to literal interpretation of the Torah. So the Tzaddukim and the Baitusim, that's what they did. They said the rabbis, what they're saying, all this interpretation stuff is thrown out, and we're going to only do what it says clearly in the Torah. And that's why he was saying.
But they didn't do it clearly. Oh no.
No, the details are from the rabbis.
There are people like that now, aren't there?
Yeah.
That don't believe anything past the 5 books of Moses or.
Yeah. I think you might have some Tzaddukim until today. There might be like a group of them, like in the north of Israel. We have 2-day Yom Tifs from them. I don't know if I'm holding you guys too long, but the reason we have 2-day Yom Tif outside of Israel is because of the Tzaddukim. Yeah, so I'll review it. So back in the old days when there was no emails, everyone in this room is old enough to remember the days when there was no emails. So when information didn't travel so quickly, the way that the calendar was set in the times of the temple was through eyewitness testimony of the reappearance of the moon. When the moon would reappear in the sky, that's when you had the first day of the month, and someone had to see it and then come to the base stand and say how they saw it. They got grilled, where in the sky was it, what shape, whatever, and then the rabbis, based on this testimony, would set a new month. Now, all of our holidays are based on a day of the month. So until the calendar's set, you don't know what day you're going to celebrate a holiday. So the way that the rabbis came up with a system is Jerusalem's on a mountain, and there's other mountains. So if you go to the highest points in a city with a torch, and the people are waiting because it's either one day or the next, and you don't have a wide margin of error. The lunar cycle is 29 and a half days. So it's either going to be the 29th day and on the 30th you see it, or it's going to be 30 days on the 31st day it's the first. So it's one or the other. So they're waiting by the mountain to see the torch. The next mountaintop, then they light the torch. And that's how they're able to spread the message across the whole country quickly, through using mountaintops and torches. So the Tzaddukim thought this was a rabbinic enactment and not legitimate. So in order to frustrate the Beis Din's ability, or the court's ability to set the calendar, they started going up on top of the mountains and setting signals the wrong way, on the wrong day. And so the rabbi's system that worked was foiled. So they had to start sending messengers by foot from the court. Now, by foot could mean like with an animal taking them, but they had to travel around with an actual human messenger with writ from the court saying, this is when we establish Rosh Chodesh, and therefore the holiday will be on such and such a day. So that's much slower. So to get to the outreaches of the country and outside of Israel, where some Jews had settled, it wasn't fast enough. So you have what's called Sveika de Yoma, a doubt of the day, because the word didn't travel fast enough. So what they would do is they would keep Yom Tif on 2 days because the word didn't spread. And if it was the first day, then that would be Yom Tif, and the second day would be like a gift. And if it was the second day, then the first day would be the gift, and the second day would be Yom Tif. And we would know, so we would act like it's Yom Tif both days. So the Tzaddukim and so once that system went in place, we didn't have a Beis Din to change it. The reason we have 2 days Yom Tif until today, thousands of years later, is because of the inner fighting between the Tzaddukim and the rabbis. Yeah, challenges, opportunities for growth, right? Okay, so I spoke about in the class about the preparations for the Yom Tif. So one of the nice ways to spend Yom Tif is together with friends and the holidays. So on behalf of my wife and my family, my wife told me to extend invitations to everybody in class. If you do not yet have a place for first day Yom Tif meal, then we would love to have you at our house.
You have soup?
I think we have soup, and chicken, and all the good stuff. Or unless I ruin the soup, you know.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I want to know.
So does everybody have plans yet
Yeah.
for Yom Kippur?
Yes,
We are
Like
hosting.
family.
You're hosting family, okay. David, do you have plans?
One of my brothers.
One of your brothers? Tanya, you have a place to go? Would you like to come to us?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And everybody, I don't know if people who are hearing me from far away on the line want to come to West Bloomfield, Michigan for Rosh Hashanah. But if you're still on the call and you find yourself in Rosh Hashanah in West Bloomfield, you have a place to stay.
Let's find out.
No takers.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that's it for tonight. I'm going to stop